The winter had arrived, and the nights were cold and snowy. One night, a young boy named Estio was lying in his bed when he heard someone calling for help. He got up and tried to locate the source of the sound. He heard someone shouting that they didn't want to die. Without hesitation, Estio decided to go outside and find the person in distress. As he stepped out, he noticed glowing orbs of light in the air, leading him in a particular direction. Following these lights, he came across a stunning black cat sitting in the snow. They made eye contact, and suddenly, the cat started coughing up blood. Estio gently patted the cat, holding it close to his chest, and whispered for it to stop crying and rest peacefully. Fast forward to the morning, Estio woke up in his bed, feeling the cold. His older brother Terriot knocked on the door, calling his name. Terriot barged in and demanded to know how long Estio intended to sleep under his blanket. Our protagonist didn't utter a word and got up, with his brother telling him to hurry and come outside. Still wrapped in his blanket, Estio's brother snatched it away, commenting on Estio's unpleasant smell. Estio smelled his sweater and gazed out the window, dreading the fact that he had to leave the house. It was the day of the coming-of-age ceremony in his hometown, Selbia, where he was born and raised. Every first Sunday of the year marked this significant event, celebrating the young people turning 19, the legal age of adulthood set by the empire. The ceremony aimed to wish them a prosperous adulthood. Descending the stairs, Estio saw some people preparing for something. His sister, Rosette, approached and jokingly thought he looked like a ghost due to his tired appearance. Rosette sniffed him and, as his older brother had mentioned earlier, she couldn't ignore the unpleasant odor. Rose playfully covered her nose and teased him about his unkempt hair, fearing people might mistake him for a beggar. Estio's father agreed, emphasizing that he needed to look presentable, especially since the ceremony was in his honor. Rosette pushed her brother aside, concerned about being seen with him, and reminded him to take a bath before coming out. Estio stood there, pondering how rude his siblings were for waking him up and demanding that he clean up. A few minutes later, he went to a well, contemplating the idea of using ice-cold water for his bath. He poured the water over his head and began washing himself. Suddenly, he heard a soft meow and wondered if it was the black cat he had named Suki. As he gazed up, a piece of cloth fell onto his face. Estio noticed Suki sitting on the roof. Suki, as if speaking, claimed it was a gift. However, when Estio examined the fine piece of cloth resembling a royal robe, he asked her where she had gotten it. Suki insisted it was a gift, but after he pleaded with her to be truthful, she admitted that someone had given her the robe. She then jumped down, scratching her head on Estio's leg, and said she got it but now wanted to give it to him. They locked eyes, and Estio had a vision of a small girl screaming. She was about to be hit by a horse-drawn cart when Suki swiftly leaped to her rescue. The girl fell to the ground, and her mother rewarded Suki with a beautiful robe as a token of gratitude for saving her daughter. This was how Suki got the robe, and Estio now believed her. He caressed Suki and praised her for saving the little girl. Then he put on the robe, which felt fantastic. Estio learned that Suki had regularly been helping him by bringing odd gifts, medicine when he was ill, or food when he was starving due to a poor harvest. While he petted Suki a bit more, a bird named Firia arrived with her friends, including birds, butterflies, a dog named Ben, and another dog, Ricky, who had just had puppies. Estio cautioned Ricky to be careful since it was a bit cold outside. As he turned around, he realized that Suki had disappeared. A little later, a beautiful blonde girl named Bella approached Estio and called his name. Bella appeared nervous and confused, asking Estio who he was. He anticipated that she might not remember him, but suddenly, Bella recognized his voice and inquired if he was Estio. She immediately asked if he was going to the ceremony that day, and upon confirmation, Bella asked if they could go together. They agreed to attend the ceremony together. Now we see many people seated at their tables, drinking and eating, but mostly drinking. One man asked where Estio was, and his sister claimed he was being sluggish. She told him to freshen up, which was probably the reason for his lateness. Everyone suggested starting without him, but then a man named Louis exclaimed that Bella had not arrived yet. The ceremony participants agreed, saying they wouldn't begin without a lovely lady like her, fearing she would be very upset if they did. A few minutes later, Bella and Estio arrived, looking great. Louis immediately told Bella he didn't think she would come. Bella explained her shoelace had snapped, making her late. Louis asked if she fell or got hurt, and Bella reassured him that she was fine. She also mentioned meeting Estio on her way, which didn't seem to make Louis too happy. Estio greeted Louis, saying it had been a while. After a moment of silence, Bella suddenly grabbed Estio's hand and pulled him with her. As she did this, Estio saw glimpses of her past and the encounters with various men who had asked to marry her. She was tired of it, and wondered if there was something new and fresh, like a charming prince who would love and cherish her, like in a novel. Estio got confused, and when Bella asked if he was okay, he backed up, slapping her hand. Bella asked if he was angry for grabbing his hand without permission and apologized. As he tried to explain himself, she stood there, a bit concerned, thinking he didn't like her. People around them started cheering and celebrating the children who had become adults that day. Bella and Estio, with empty jugs, started talking and thanked each other for the company. As they conversed, Louis observed them, wondering how and when Estio got his new clothing, thinking it looked quite expensive, likely a gift from his parents. While sipping his drink, Louis overheard a conversation between Estio's parents, realizing that they hadn't bought the clothing. Losing patience, Louis slammed his beer on the table and asked Estio where he got the clothing. Estio, with no expression on his face, replied that it was a gift from a friend. Louis pressed on, asking who that friend was, pushing him to tell the truth. Finally, Estio said our protagonist probably stole the clothing, which made everyone in the room stare at him. Estio felt pressure, imagining everyone in the room forcing him to tell the truth and fearing that they would beat him up. Louis cynically continued asking questions, but everyone in the room continued to wonder if he really stole the clothing. Estio wanted to say the clothing wasn't stolen but couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. He looked at Bella, but her expression showed she believed he had stolen something. Suddenly, a young child called him a monster and threw something, hitting Estio's head. Then, someone threw something at a lantern above him, and red liquid splashed all over him, ruining his fine clothes. As he wiped his face, the children started calling him a monster, and his parents and siblings were on their way to leave the ceremony. Estio had secretly hoped for a different outcome, but now he realized there was no place for him there. The next morning, he woke up, curled up in bed, and suddenly started laughing frantically as tears streamed down his cheeks. Estio packed his clothes in a bag and decided to leave. He climbed the nearest hill, looked back at his house, and thought it didn't matter. He had to go, as leaving seemed like the best choice. A few minutes later, he reached a crossroads, wondering which way to choose. At that moment, a man riding a carriage appeared and asked why he was traveling by foot in the cold. He suggested Estio hop in, and Estio accepted the offer, joining the man for a ride. Out of nowhere, Suki appeared on the carriage's roof, bringing joy to Estio. Estio was lost in thought about leaving his hometown on the night of his coming-of-age ceremony. The next morning, the carriage abruptly stopped, and Estio woke up to find someone sitting in front of him. The knight asked why he looked surprised and assumed he was a country boy. Estio remained silent and observed the two giant swords, wondering if the person guarded the carriage. The person realized Estio was quiet but continued to talk, saying they went through the trouble of letting him in, so he should introduce himself. Estio complied, introducing himself. The person then made a joke about his name, calling him Esto, but Estio didn't find it funny. Finally, the person introduced herself as Lena and asked if her introduction was meant to be funny. Estio nervously nodded, and Lena continued, asking why he was heading to the city and whether he was seeking a job. She cautioned him that finding a job in the city was challenging and advised against expecting to hit the jackpot. Finding a job in the city was challenging and advised against expecting to hit the jackpot. Estio admitted he hadn't thought that far and had no clear goals or talents, even with his abilities. Lena inquired if he was good at anything, and Estio mentioned his skill in handling animals. Lena asked if he was trying to join a circus. Estio said something different from what he meant, and he had the unique ability to understand what others were thinking. Lena, who was with him, laughed suddenly, making him realize that no one else had the same power to read people's thoughts and memories. Now, we find out that Suki wasn't actually speaking to Estio's humans do. He could read her thoughts and memories. He could see and hear people's thoughts, even if he didn't want to. He thought it was a power that no human should have. A few minutes later, Lena jumped out of the carriage and called Estio. She reported that the horses were causing a problem and wouldn't move, likely because they were tired. 3 hours later, Lena bought some bread and returned to the carriage, snacking on her bread. Estio was frustrated, suggesting they should kill the horses and get a new carriage. Lena remembered that Estio claimed he could read everyone's minds, so she grabbed his hand and insisted that they go. She explained that if he really was a mind reader, he should read the horses' minds. Estio said the horses needed to concentrate hard for him to hear them. Lena, ignoring his complaints, thought it was cool and encouraged him to listen to the horses. The merchant was whipping the horses to force them to move, but they wouldn't budge. Estio politely asked the merchant to wait a moment so he could check on the horses. The merchant asked what Estio had said, and he replied that it would only take a moment. The merchant agreed, and Estio approached the horses. One of them seemed very upset, so our protagonist gently asked what was wrong. Suddenly, glowing balls and particles appeared, much like when he met Suki, and Estio could now read the thoughts of the horses. The horse explained that it was scared because something big and dangerous was ahead, ready to attack them. Our protagonist asked what exactly was so scary, and the horse replied, describing a monstrous, gray creature with sharp teeth and white fur, much larger than the horses. He mentioned that an attack from this creature would lead to heavy casualties and was the reason the horses had stopped. Lena had started to imagine the monster described by Estio, and the merchant questioned whether there was truly a monster up there. He found it hard to believe Estio's words. So, he approached Lena, and they began talking. A moment later, Lena revealed that she knew about a large creature that could be seen on the snow-covered mountain. This creature was a white-furred monkey named Khalid. The merchant agreed, explaining that it was a rare species, but not a monster, just a wild animal. Therefore, there was no reason for the horses to be afraid. Lena mentioned that the horses wouldn't move anyway, so there was nothing they could do about it. She then invited Estio to accompany her. Half an hour later, she gathered a few people to join them in a mission to find the white-fur monkey. Lena took Estio's hand and said they needed to hurry. When Estio questioned why he was going with her, she replied with a smile that they might need a translator for this expedition. Estio realized that, according to the horses, the creature might be more than just a white-fur monkey. It could be a violent monster or something even worse. He deliberately didn't reveal the extent of his abilities, allowing people to think he could merely understand animal emotions. His family disliked him after discovering his ability to read their thoughts, causing him to become disinterested in other people, even those who seemed to trust him. The group of 6 continued their journey through the misty mountains. When night fell, one of them used magical light to illuminate the path. Shortly after, a massive monkey-like creature appeared in front of them. The creature threatened them, saying it would kill all the humans. Everyone froze, and Estio realized that to understand a creature's emotions without physical contact, it needed to have a strong will. Since he could sense its murderous intent from a distance, the creature was undeniably powerful. Estio calmly suggested they turn back and leave, but Lena insisted it was the only path they could take. Drawing her swords, she asked if there were any other monsters out there, to which Estio replied that there weren't, but the one in front of them was undoubtedly dangerous. Lena brandished her swords, and the others readied their weapons. When a bold archer shot an arrow into the creature's hand, it roared even louder and sent him flying, causing panic among the group. The monster had tried to grab and crush him, but Estio stepped in and told it to stop. He assured the creature that everything was okay and asked it to calm down. Miraculously, it worked. Just as they were making peace, Lena leaped out from behind, thinking she was saving Estio, and sliced the monster's back. The animal screamed, fell to its knees, and then quickly fled. They all started chasing it, but Estio sat down, pondering why he had intervened. It was only for a moment, but if the monster lost its life, it would be all his fault. As he sat on the ground, he could feel the creature's fear and its longing for its mother. At that moment, he realized he had to go and rejoin his team. Estio took a different path and discovered the animal's footprints in the snow, leading to a cave. It was eerily quiet, so he thought the warriors hadn't found it yet. He cautiously entered and was hit by a strong smell of blood. A thought came up about helping Niju, but the cat suggested leaving her alone. Estio argued that Niju was injured and could die if found. Suki reluctantly agreed, and they returned to the cave. They found Niju asleep. Estio used his robe from the bag Suki brought to cover himself, and tried to keep Niju warm. As he left the cave, Suki suddenly appeared and scolded him for getting into trouble so often. They had a brief chat, and Suki started to leave. Estio asked where she was going, and she said she was heading to the carriage. Niju mentioned it didn't matter anymore because she felt fine now. She didn't want revenge if it involved using human money. She decided to go to sleep, and Estio wished her a good night. She expressed her anger and her initial desire to kill all humans, but after Estio's arrival, her perspective completely changed. Estio admitted it was his fault because he used to control Niju's emotions. Niju asked if he could really do that, and Estio replied he wasn't entirely sure, but it seemed like he could read and control emotions, and that's what he did back then. This question moved Estio to tears, and he said it wasn't possible. Niju then asked if she could get revenge with money, and after confirming she could, she began to cry, realizing the darkness of money. Our protagonist explained that he hadn't come to harm anyone, he just felt compelled to enter the cave. Niju said the humans had killed her mother, and she couldn't understand why one human would kill another. Estio mentioned it could be because of money, and Niju asked what money was. After explaining that money was something that could be used to acquire anything one wanted, Niju asked if she could use the money to reunite with her mother and family. This question moved Estio to tears, and he said it wasn't possible. Niju then asked if she could. Since then, Niju's hatred for humans has grown, and it wants to kill every human it encounters. The monkey asked Estio if he was its mother, but Estio said he wasn't. Niju asked who he was, and after introducing themselves, Niju inquired if Estio had come to kill it. As she woke up, they offered her some food and let her play with their baby. The lady said that their baby, as pretty as the snow, would be named Niju. A few days later, armed men entered the cave, and the lady told Niju to hide. The men approached and killed her, and Niju witnessed it all. In the memory, a group of monkeys had found an unconscious girl on a mountaintop. They decided to pick her up and bring her to their cave. After a few more steps, he found himself face to face with the wounded monster, which was looking away. Glowing light orbs appeared, allowing Estio to see into the white fur monkey's memories. A while later, Suki told the protagonist to go back to the carriage. Estio stayed quiet and tried to sleep next to Niju. Suddenly, Suki transformed into a big cat, more like a tiger, and blamed Estio for getting sick. She curled up next to him, and they all fell asleep. In another scene, there was a room with scattered papers and test tubes. Two scientists stood in front of Suki in her larger form, and they deemed her a failed experiment, ordering her execution. They hurt her and left her in the snow to die. She transformed into a small kitten, freezing in the cold. The protagonist arrived and saved her, giving her the name Suki. A few hours later they woke up. Estio thanked Suki for being there for him and assured her that he was fine. She transformed back into a kitten, which amazed him. Niju woke up too and looked at Suki with happiness. Niju became a bit jealous and asked Estio how long he planned to keep Niju by his side. He replied that Niju was likely fine now, and the wound on her back appeared to be healed. There didn't seem to be any groups chasing her. He patted Niju and told her to take care. Niju called his name, and Suki expressed amazement that she could talk. Niju asked if they could go together now, and the protagonist asked if she was sure about that. Niju playfully touched his head, and the protagonist said he didn't mind if she went, but he warned that it might be dangerous, and he might not be able to protect her. She began to flex and declared her intention to protect him, but Estio clarified that wasn't what he meant. Niju then expressed her fear of being alone in the cave and mountains. She wanted to go to the city where there were lots of humans. Estio asked if she'd feel scared or angry around people, which made Niju panic. Estio could read her thoughts, and she thought she might get angry if she encountered the enemies who killed her family. However, she decided that meeting other people would be fine. Estio cautioned her about potential dangers from humans, but Niju smiled, saying it would be a good reason to get angry at humans. Our protagonist could read Suki's mind as she pondered what he should do, so he decided to bring Niju with them. Now, we see a beautiful city called Galasia, and our protagonist and Niju walk its streets. They stopped in the middle of a bustling market, and Estio wondered where Suki was. Moments later, they heard someone calling, and 2 officers arrived, insisting that Estio needed to leash his medium-sized animal. They warned him about white fur monkeys and handed him a leash, suggesting he use it. Estio felt uncomfortable, but Niju reassured him, so he put the leash on Niju's neck to satisfy the officers. They also noticed Niju's intelligence and advised him to take good care of her. Our protagonist apologized to Niju for the treatment, but she compared Estio to her mother, who also apologized frequently, and said sorry meant, "I love you." Estio smiled and crouched down to continue talking with her. Soon after, they embarked on a job search. Every shop owner refused to hire Estio, citing his appearance and the fact that he had a large beast with him. One shop owner suggested he join a guild, as they might find a suitable job for him. Initially puzzled, Estio soon understood that guilds took on various requests and were likely to find a job that suited him. Focusing on this advice, he headed to the center of town and found the Ignis Guild building. As he was about to enter, a friendly blonde lady greeted him and welcomed them to the Ignis Guild, ensuring customer satisfaction. She advised them to visit the right window for inquiries about requests and to get a waiting ticket. Estio approached her, and she smiled when she heard they were looking for new guild members. She told him to go upstairs and fill out an application form. She kindly offered to help if he had trouble reading, but Estio said he could read just fine. After thanking her and bowing, he headed up the stairs. On the second floor, they were stopped by a man with a mustache. The man asked Estio if he was there to apply for the guild, thinking he might be inexperienced. Estio explained that he came because he heard they were accepting new members and mentioned that the guild takes on requests and solves them. The man, who turned out to be Hawk, the branch manager of Ignis Guild in Galatia, introduced himself. Estio introduced himself as well and handed over his documents. Hawk mentioned they were short on manpower due to an increase in requests, so he'd be open to hiring almost anyone. He asked about Estio's hometown, and Estio said he was from the river region. Hawk joked about whether the entire river was his hometown, and Estio clarified that he was from Selbia. Looking at the documents, Hawk asked if Estio's specialty was handling animals, to which Estio replied, something like that. Hawk advised him not to use vague phrases in the future, and said he needed to understand Estio's abilities to assign suitable tasks. Estio revealed that he could read the hearts of animals, which intrigued Hawk. While there were various types of ability users in the world, like magicians, elementalists, alchemists, healers, and swordsmen, Estio's ability to read animals' hearts was unique. Hawk considered that this ability might be more useful in understanding humans. Hawk acknowledged that if he had known Estio was an ability user, he wouldn't have needed such a detailed interview. Hawk saw Estio as a potential asset, a hidden card worth taking a chance on for a job. He then sent Estio to a person who collected animals and lived on Shark Road. Hawk explained that this animal collector had bought some rare animal species recently, but he had trouble taking care of them. If Estio could really understand animals, he might be able to help. Estio simply nodded, and Hawk added that if he completed the job successfully, he would receive a guild coin from the animal collector. This guild coin would serve as proof of his success. Hawk handed Estio the necessary documents, and told him to bring back that coin. They took a walk outside, and as Estio looked at the piece of paper, his animal companion, Niju, sniffed something and pointed in one direction. She indicated that their destination was in that direction. Estio thanked her, and Niju felt very happy to be of help to her master. They walked down the street and eventually found the collector's house. Some dogs were barking in front of the house. Estio and Niju crouched down to greet them, though Niju seemed a bit menacing. Estio assured them not to be scared, as he wouldn't harm them. He explained that he had come to meet the owner of the house. The dogs calmed down, and he patted them. The dogs mentioned that they weren't scared anymore and asked for his name. Estio introduced himself. A moment later, the owner of the dogs arrived and asked if Estio was the person who could help him. Estio explained that he had been sent by the Ignis Guild. The man, after witnessing how Estio handled the dogs, thought that Estio might indeed have the unusual ability to control animals. He asked Estio to follow him. A minute later, they entered the animal shelter, which was full of cages. There was also a dragon-like animal in one of the enclosures. The owner asked Estio if he knew why it was agitated and restless. He explained that it was a rare and expensive breed that was hard to obtain. It had been fine when it first arrived, but it had stopped eating, and the owner was becoming desperate. Estio gazed at the creature and said it was still a young animal. Upon hearing these words, the collector got angry and asked why Estio was stating the obvious. He added that if the animal wasn't properly trained when young, it could become hostile, making it impossible to sell to the nobles. Estio continued to observe the small animal, and the collector wondered why Estio was unfazed. Estio explained that the animal was in pain, but he didn't know exactly where. Suddenly, he felt pain in his chest and screamed. The collector asked if Estio was in pain, but Estio clarified that it was the animal's pain transferring to his body. The man looked at him, confused by the situation. Then, Estio had a vision of the creature at the bottom of the ocean. The collector had yelled, interrupting his thoughts. Estio had explained that the creature's heart had been melting. The man had angrily asked what he was talking about, and Estio had further explained that the creature in front of them usually lived in a very cold environment. So if it stayed in dry dirt and sawdust, it would have suffocated to death. The collector had yelled and insulted Estio, saying that Drakes lived in the desert. Estio had said that its heart was made of ice and was melting, but the man still couldn't believe him. Then the man remembered putting Drakey in a cage, and Drakey not understanding why he had to spend his time in a hot environment. Estio had taken a shovel and tried to open the terrarium, but the collector had told him to bring in some snow from outside. He had then taken Drakey and put him in an aquarium, and Drakey had immediately felt much better. The man had then yelled at Estio to go outside and bring some snow as soon as possible. With a worried expression on his face, Estio had rushed outside with a shovel, doing his best to save little Drakey. He had taken some snow with a shovel and brought it inside. The man had asked him to get some more, looking much more concerned about his little pet compared to an hour ago. Estio had brought some more snow, and now we saw that the animal's full name was Ice Drakey. They were already a rare species, and there were even fewer ice variants, so they weren't well known. The animal collector had been happy and amazed by Estio's ability, so he had asked him to follow him. Estio had healed a horse with a thorn in its foot, separated two pumas because they are very territorial, and saved many other animals. The man had been extremely happy now, thinking Estio's ability was the real deal. As a reward, he had given him a small bag with something inside, and they had said their goodbyes. Nija had seen her master sweating, so she had asked what was wrong. Now we saw Estio hearing all the animals he helped, telling him to stay. But he had said it was nothing and suggested they head back to Hawk. As they walked back, he had wondered what would happen to him next. He had thought that people would think he was cursed, hearing such strange things like animals' thoughts. He had gotten upset and crouched, and Nija had hugged him. A few seconds later, Suki came and asked what was wrong, suggesting that he stand up if he didn't want to get sick. Estio had patted and thanked her for not avoiding him, but Suki had asked why she would avoid him. Estio had then said she never let him pat her head, but Suki had explained she let him now because he was different from other people. She then hopped onto a wall and declared she would never dodge him, then she dashed away. They reached Hawk's office, and he was amazed to find not one but 2 gold coins. Hawk found it incredible because the collector guy was pretty selective and wouldn't give away 2 coins for anything. Glancing at Estio, he also realized his skills were the real deal. Hawk happily announced that Estio had officially joined Ignis Guild, and he explained he would provide Estio with a guild ID badge and uniform. He told Estio to wear them while completing tasks. Hawk hurried off and returned quickly with the uniform. He further mentioned that the 3rd floor served as lodging for guild members, and while it wasn't luxurious, it was a place to stay. Hawk explained that animals were allowed and suggested that Estio visit the work support department the next morning. Estio simply nodded, and Hawk advised him to rest. Estio went to his room, cleaned Niju, tried on the uniform, and looked at himself in the mirror. It looked fantastic, and Niju agreed. Estio decided to finally get some rest. As he gazed at the snow through the window, he found it strangely nostalgic. They had a brief conversation, and he asked if she regretted following him. Given the chains around her neck restricting her freedom, people would stare, making things harder for her. As he suspected, she did regret it and planned to set her free in the mountains the next day. He imagined climbing onto Nija's massive body and clutching it tightly. He heard her thoughts, and she was glad to be with him, preferring his company over other humans. Without speaking a word, Nija conveyed her feelings, and Estio thanked her before she fell asleep. Back when he lived with his family, his brother had given him a worn-out dictionary. He had learned words all on his own. There was one word he now understood well. Bond, and he knew its true meaning. The next day at Ignis Guild House, Estio put on his guild attire and descended the stairs. Hawk greeted them with a smile and mentioned he couldn't recognize our main character in their new outfit. He remarked that the guild uniform looked good on them. At that moment, a lady named Rosalie approached and asked about Estio. Hawk introduced Estio as a new member who had joined the guild the day before. When Rosalie learned that Estio wouldn't be assigned to the support or combat departments, she was confused and wondered why, considering Estio's ability. Hawk explained that Estio had a unique ability, and they would have to wait another day to get more information from the higher-ups. Hawk then offered Estio a piece of candy, and when Estio accepted, Hawk became quite happy, mentioning that most people had no idea how they tasted. Estio just stood there, thinking it was a strange way to judge someone's abilities based on randomly picking a candy without much thought. As Hawk continued to praise Estio, Rosa explained that Hawk was always like that. Estio opened his mouth and began chewing the candy while Hawk said that Estio would bring good fortune to the guild. However, Estio realized that the candy wasn't as delicious as it seemed and was actually uncomfortable to eat. Since they didn't know which department Estio would be assigned to, they suggested he help with paperwork for a while. Inside the office, there were many people working and piles of papers on the table. Rosa asked Estio if he had a black rubber band, to which he replied that he didn't. She mentioned it would be nice to have one, and Estio simply replied that he understood. After a few seconds of silence, Rosa explained that if there was nothing else to do, he should just do something. In this case, he could go buy the needed supplies. Estio stood there while Rosa continued to explain that he needed to stamp the receipts, find a black rubber band, and get a unicorn quill. She gave him several instructions, making Estio feel a bit overwhelmed. Fortunately, Niju was there and suggested they go outside to buy the supplies. They headed to a nearby square and entered a cool-looking shop with vines on the walls and a clean atmosphere. Estio tried to get the owner's attention but failed. The owner was busy searching for something and eventually found it, making her very happy. When she finally noticed Niju, she screamed and called her a monster. The pink-haired lady then slipped on a ladder but fell into Estio's arms, thanking him for saving her. Estio reassured the shop owner that Niju wasn't a monster. The owner apologized, saying she was afraid of animals and didn't realize Niju was a pet. Estio corrected her once more, explaining that Niju wasn't a pet. The girl quickly apologized and grasped that Niju was a friend, not a pet or a monster. She introduced herself with a smile, saying her name was Selly. Estio didn't share his name and simply asked for a set of black rubber bands and a corn quill. Selly began searching for the items he requested, while Estio noticed a blue marble that had slipped from her grasp and landed in his arms when she slipped. Thompson mentioned that he was feeling quite sick that day, and she saved him by taking him home and taking care of him. He found her very attractive and fell in love with her. Later on, he proposed, and they got married. Continuing the vision, Juan discovered Teal's marriage and threatened to take his own life if she left him for real. In a vision, Teal was seen running and completing some deliveries. She even skipped lunch to finish before sunset. That day, she saw a guy fall on a grassy field while working. She approached him and asked if he was okay. The guy was Thompson. He explained that it was him, and that it was the first time they had met. Teal replied that she wasn't planning to get married yet, and she had already turned the person down 3 times. She then explained that they had decided to break up because she wasn't ready to marry him anytime soon. After that, they went their separate ways. She fell in love with a young man named Juan, but unfortunately, poverty made their dreams difficult to achieve and pulled them down. One day, her sibling told her that he had heard someone propose to her. Teal worked tirelessly, tending to the garden, fixing toys, and many other tasks to provide for her siblings. They helped by collecting firewood and edible grass and always showed their love by giving her flowers. Selly had found all the items she had ordered and put them in a paper bag. Then, she got worried because she thought she had lost her crystal ball. But Estio came to her rescue and showed her where she had dropped it. Selly picked up the ball, and as Estio was about to leave, she asked for his name. He turned around and told her his name was Estio. Selly then approached him and asked if she could use the crystal ball. She explained that it was a new product, and that she had taken a big risk to get a crystal ball that could read a person's heart just by holding it. She also mentioned that the ball changed color based on a person's emotions. Selly asked if it could be used for romantic purposes, but Estio said he didn't need it. This surprised Selly, and she asked why. Estio explained that no one would want to invade another person's privacy by reading their thoughts, memories, or emotions. He considered it the most useless ability in the world. Selly, holding the crystal ball in her hands, thought that Estio sounded like someone who read a lot of books. As they left the shop, the ball's color changed from blue to dark blue, almost black. Estio returned to the guild house, delivered the items, and took care of some gardening. The next day, Hawk announced that Estio had joined the Special Support Department. Estio asked what he was supposed to do there, and Hawk handed him a piece of paper with information about a request. The request was to help train a puppy named Hiru, which didn't listen well. Estio looked at the request with a sad expression in his eyes. Hawk explained that in his case, combat training or experience wasn't necessary, but his work was crucial for high-ranking nobles. He added that satisfying the nobles' needs was the standard for success. If he received a guild coin, it was considered a success, but if they requested a cancellation or a change in guild members, it was considered a failure. Hawk mentioned that the request seemed easy, but pleasing the noble was a matter of course. If he made the noble unhappy, not only would there be a cancellation request, but his future could also be needlessly hindered. Estio promised to keep that in mind, and Hawk advised him to serve the noble with dedication, whether they were adults or children. Hawk wished him good luck and offered another candy. Surprisingly, Estio took it and realized it had the same terrible taste as before. The day after, he reached the grand mansion of the nobles. Estio had brought Niju along, keeping her on a leash. He walked up to the guards and mentioned that he had come in response to a request from the Ignis Guild. After showing the request, they allowed him inside. They guided him through a long hallway, and in the middle of it, there was a small white dog. Upon hearing the dog's barking, Estio sensed that something was off. He read the dog's thoughts and realized that the dog wanted him to leave. Just then, a little girl came running, calling for her small dog and telling it to stop barking. She attempted to calm the dog down by touching it, but it only barked even louder. Estio explained that he was from the Ignis Guild, and the little girl expressed surprise, thinking that a tough, older man would arrive instead of a seemingly weaker boy like him. She inquired about Estio's age, and he mentioned that he was turning 17 that year. Niju. The girl, Sarah, opened her mouth in amazement upon seeing Niju and complimented her beauty. She introduced herself as Sarah. Maids arrived and urged Sarah to stay away from the big monkey. Sarah agreed and the ladies politely stepped back. Then Sarah mentioned that she had heard that Estio could understand the emotions of animals. She asked him to figure out why her agitated dog, Hiru, was so hostile towards other people. Hiru appeared scared, so Estio instructed Niju to step back for a moment. He then crouched down close to the dog, with Sarah and the maids observing from behind. Estio had a thought. He believed that if he could touch the dog, its ability would get stronger. So, he removed a glove from his hand and reached out, assuring the dog he wouldn't harm it. Hiru, the dog, simply stood there, not moving. Sarah watched, hoping her puppy could become friendlier. The dog rested its head on Estio's hand, and something extraordinary happened. Estio felt like he was inside the dog's mind. In this mental journey, he saw a vision of Hiru lying next to his mother in a cage. His mother was in pain after giving birth to puppies, and the owner decided it was her last time. They intended to get rid of her. They took her away, leaving Hiru sad and unwilling to be separated. The owners knew that small dogs were trendy in high society, so they starved Hiru, planning to sell him for a high price. The vision also revealed a person named Viscount Fabian instructing someone to prepare Hiru for sale. Hiru ended up with Sarah, but he viewed the world as a cold and frightening place because humans had taken his mother and caused him suffering. Another part of the vision showed Sarah receiving Hiru as a birthday gift from her father. She cherished Hiru, considering him cute and precious, even calling him her angel. However, Hiru wasn't as thrilled about the situation, and he began to bite his new owner, Sarah. Her father was unhappy with Hiru's behavior and thought about getting rid of him. Sarah, determined to raise Hiru well, convinced her father to seek a specialist's help. Her father warned that a dog that bites its owner is simply untrainable and savage, and if the specialist couldn't fix the issue, they'd have to consider other options. Sarah interrupted Estio's vision, asking if he had discovered the root of the problem. Estio had discovered everything that was wrong with Hiru in the past. He admitted to being afraid of all the affection she had given him. Estio also mentioned that the dog had never received love before, and he knew that people would eventually harm it, just like they had done to its mother. Sarah clenched her fists, and Estio could sense her feelings. She believed she cared for Hiru the most, and if she could read hearts, she would have treated him better, just as he could read her thoughts. Estio then shared that understanding the dog's heart wasn't everything. Hiru's mother had been killed by humans, and he had been made to starve to increase his value. Sarah was shocked to hear this, and Estio explained that Hiru's mother had become old and sick, making her useless to them. Sarah began crying, expressing that she had only good intentions and wanted the best for him. Estio called Hiru's name and used his ability, and the surroundings turned blue. Inside the sea of thoughts, Hiru talked to Sarah about how she genuinely cared and wanted the best for him. They exchanged glances, and Hiru slowly approached her. Sarah asked if she could hug him, and Hiru thought it would be okay. Sarah embraced him and felt immense happiness. She then expressed her gratitude for the Ignis Guild and thanked Estio for his help. Sarah admitted that she had been wrong about Hiru all along, not knowing anything about his past. Estio comforted her, assuring her that it wasn't her fault, but rather the fault of those who had sold Hiru. He added that the dog had misunderstood her intentions, which were different from what he had experienced before. Estio's words brought a big smile to Sarah's face, and she gave him a guild coin, telling him to keep it safe. Then, her father arrived and made a joke about hearing her cry all the way to the garden. He acknowledged Estio's presence, and noted that the ability he used to fix the situation was quite unusual. Estio explained that his ability was to read the hearts of animals. Sarah's father then asked Estio if he knew what happens when a commoner like him lies in front of a noble. Estio didn't respond, and the noble continued to mock him, asking if he could read the hearts of monster-human hybrids. He even suggested that if Estio could read people's hearts, he must be a monster himself. The noble put his hand on Estio's shoulder and mentioned a job that only Estio could handle. Estio tried to say something, but the noble said he would send a request to the guild soon. Sarah's father left, and she ran to Estio, holding Hiru in her arms. She thanked him for his help and promised to call him again in the future. Suddenly, Sarah's brother, Jerry, interrupted their conversation and asked if Estio's ability had limits. Estio replied that he couldn't read everything, so there was no need to worry. Jerry pushed Estio and ordered him to leave, yelling loudly. Sarah was scared and started crying, telling Jerry that she hated him. Estio simply opened the door and left the mansion. She thanked him for his help and promised to call him again in the future. Suddenly, Sarah's brother, Jerry, interrupted their conversation and asked if Estio's ability had limits. Estio replied that he couldn't read everything, so there was no need to worry. Jerry pushed Estio and ordered him to leave, yelling loudly. Sarah was scared and started crying, telling Jerry that she hated him. Estio simply opened the door and left the mansion. As they left the mansion, Niju immediately mentioned that humans were quite strange. But then she added that she enjoyed it when Estio could read her thoughts. It was cool because she didn't have to say anything, and he would know what she was thinking. While holding his coin, Estio said that this might be why some people disliked his ability. Niju remarked that this is why she found humans odd. She also said that Estio wasn't a scary person. In fact, he was the opposite. Niju commented that the only frightening thing about Estio's power was that he could hear other people's thoughts when they were hiding them. Estio told her that anyone who got angry at him also got scared or thought of him as a monster. However, Estio expressed that he didn't care about any of that. He felt that spending time with Niju and Suki was much better than when he was trapped in the attic. It made him feel alive. A few days later, Hawk and Rosa congratulated him for gaining the attention of the noble lord from before. Rosa praised Estio, saying he achieved it much faster than she had expected. Estio, aware of what really happened at the noble's mansion, simply nodded and said nothing. Later that day, Estio received a special support request from the Jefferson Company, the city's largest gem commercial shareholder. They had unexpectedly closed their shops, causing trouble for other jewel businesses. Now, Estio had to find Thompson, the head of the company, and discover the reason behind this decision. If he completed the first request, he would receive 1 guild coin as a reward. If he completed the second request, he would receive an additional 3 guild coins. Niju was playing with Rosa, but Estio asked her to go with him. Hawk and Rosa wished him good luck, and Estio promised that he would return very soon. As they left the guild house, Niju asked which way they should go, and Estio told her to follow the big road for about an hour. Niju offered to carry him, but Estio initially declined. Niju felt she was of no help, but then Estio changed his mind and decided to take a ride. He sat on Niju, and she ran very fast. They arrived in just a few minutes and stood in front of a fancy shop. Estio thought the jewelry in the window looked like pretty colored pebbles and couldn't understand why everyone was so obsessed with them. He knocked on the door and asked if anyone was home. After waiting for a few seconds with no response, Niju asked what they should do. Estio said the owner probably hadn't gone anywhere despite the shop being closed. He sat down on the floor and decided to wait. Niju asked if he was cold, but Estio reassured her that he was fine. They fell asleep, and night fell. The owner finally opened the door and asked if they were out of their minds, thinking the cold weather would discourage them from waiting. Estio asked if he was Mr. Thompson, but the man didn't care, as he wasn't selling anything and suggested they leave. Seeing that Estio was freezing, the man coldly advised him to go 2 blocks away and jump in the river if he really wanted to hurt himself in the cold. The angry man then grabbed Estio's hand, and Niji tried to save him. Suddenly, Estio saw the man's past in a vision. He saw that Mr. Thompson had a beautiful wife named Teal, and he had fallen in love with her at first sight. It seemed like a dream come true when she accepted his marriage proposal. However, after their marriage, only painful days awaited his wife. Their first child passed away before its first birthday, and so did their second and third child. It was a cycle of pregnancies and miscarriages. Their fourth child finally arrived but succumbed to extreme stress and depression by its first birthday. Teal didn't look after her child, and soon their marriage showed signs of strain. Estio witnessed Mr. Thompson pleading with his wife, but she remained unmoved. Eventually, Thompson's wife left him, and he decided to close his company to care for his young daughter. Thompson's wife left him, and he decided to close his company to care for his young daughter. Estio advised Thompson to disregard his wife if she refused to talk to him. Thompson was taken aback by Estio's words, but Estio continued, explaining that if someone doesn't want to accept the truth, they won't listen, even if you try to force it on them. Thompson, filled with anger, grabbed Estio and angrily threw him into his house. Inside, Thompson demanded to know what Estio knew about his wife, Teal. Estio introduced himself, and Thompson suspected the nobles had informed Estio about his wife. Niju stood beside Estio, trying to protect him from harm. Thompson believed the nobles were only interested in his jewels, and he apologized for being rough with Estio. He extended a hand and introduced himself as the head of the Jefferson Company. Estio declined his help and got up on his own. Thompson then inquired about the reason for Estio's visit, and Estio explained that it was a request to assist in reopening the business. Thompson had crossed his hands and mentioned that the nobles used to be very impatient. He then offered Estio a sweet drink as an apology, noting that young people like him often enjoyed beverages like tequila with fruit. Thompson took a sip directly from the bottle and commented that Estio appeared inexperienced in worldly matters. Estio remained silent. Thompson suggested that for a better relationship, they should share a drink. Estio agreed, and Thompson advised him not to pry into people's personal lives, referring to Estio's earlier mention of his wife, Teal. Estio apologized, and Thompson asked why Estio's guild had sent someone so young. He also mentioned that he had no plans to start a business anytime soon. Estio stayed quiet, and Thompson asked if he was going to ask why. As requested, Estio asked Thompson why he didn't want to open a business. Thompson, noticing Estio's lack of genuine interest, smiled and didn't provide an answer. Instead, he asked if Estio wanted a drink. In response, Estio quickly agreed. Thompson became quite intoxicated and began to talk about his love for his wife, Teal, and his daughter, Leah. He stated that he wouldn't trade them for the entire world. Thompson then gave Estio his drink and continued, mentioning that Teal had been unwell for many years. After their first child passed away, she stopped smiling and gradually withdrew from the world. Even after giving birth to Leah, she remained secluded in her room. Thompson tried to encourage her to come out, calling her "dear," but nothing worked. She even attempted to take her own life by biting her tongue, though she survived. Thompson placed his glass on the table and spoke about how his wife had a strong aversion to meeting their daughter. He began to cry, wiping away his tears. Mr. Thompson explained that he had only come downstairs briefly after putting their daughter, Leah, to sleep. He apologized to Estio for failing to fulfill a request and suggested that Estio should seek other companies for products. As he attempted to leave, Estio asked if Thompson would consider reopening his business if his wife's condition improved. Thompson expressed his willingness to do so. Estio confidently told Mr. Thompson that he would make his wife leave her room. Thompson, puzzled, asked how he could accomplish that. Estio placed his fingers on Thompson's forehead and communicated with him telepathically, demonstrating his unique abilities. Thompson initially slapped Estio's hand but then realized he could hear Nija's thoughts, assuring him that Estio was not a threat. Thompson was astonished and fell to the floor. Estio offered to help his wife, and they made an agreement. The three of them proceeded to the upper floor, where Thompson knocked on his wife's door, announcing their guest. She remained silent, so he opened the door and entered her room. There, she sat on a porch swing with a vacant expression. Thompson closed the window, expressing concern for his wife's cold hand. He tried to warm her up. Estio approached and placed his hand on Teal's head, closing his eyes. He sensed that there was very little on her mind but made an effort to delve deeper to understand her thoughts. Then, a strange dark matter suddenly appeared between Estio's fingers. He felt a peculiar sensation as his hand started to glow, and the curtains in the room were lifted abruptly. Mr. Thompson looked around in surprise, and everyone was engulfed by the dark matter. In an instant, they found themselves in a beautiful green forest. Estio turned back and saw a charming cottage. Then, Thompson's wife emerged from the house and expressed her desire to rest instead of working in the scorching heat. Thompson couldn't believe his eyes. He remarked that she looked exactly as she did when they first met. Teal, who was passing by, explained that these were undoubtedly his wife's memories. The vision showed that Teal had grown up as the daughter of a poor farmer. Her mother had passed away when she was very young, and her father had also left her after a few years. The only family she had left were her two younger siblings, whom she supported. Juan took some poison from his pocket and said he couldn't bear the thought of living without her. He begged her to come back to him. Teal was shocked but said she didn't care and that he could do whatever he wanted. She mentioned that they had no connection anymore and expressed her hope that he would find a good girl and be happy. Juan felt sick to his stomach, so he took the pills and ate them. Teal turned back and started running to him, yelling his name. She tried to wake him up, but it was too late. Estio and Thompson were observing everything. Thompson expressed his surprise, mentioning that he had no prior knowledge of another man who loved her. Estio suggested that she might not have wanted him to know because she felt as if she had been cursed by someone. This made Thompson start crying and confess that the real reason she married him might have been for money. Estio agreed, pointing out that she had turned down a poor farmer's proposal and chose a man who gave her expensive jewelry instead. Estio then asked Thompson if he would change his feelings if she had indeed married him solely for the money and jewelry. Thompson was puzzled and asked for clarification. Estio explained that if his wife had married him for material wealth, would he still consider her one of the two most important people in his life? Thompson responded with tears, saying that he would never exclude her, as he loved his wife wholeheartedly. He expressed frustration that she had given up her chance for happiness. They later remembered a moment when Thompson tried to make his wife look at their daughter, but she refused and turned away. She didn't want to hold their daughter even once. Estio defended her, explaining that she did feel something, as she was already suffering. Thompson asked how that was possible, and Estio clarified that his wife believed that losing her children the same way every time was her way of atoning for her sins. Thompson comforted his wife, reassuring her that their daughter, Leah, was not dead and would be alive and well in the future. He implored her to stop blaming herself and to return to him. He emphasized that there was no reason for her to hurt herself, and if something did happen, they could face it together to make the pain easier to bear. He had then asked her to return to him because they were family. Suddenly, the window shattered into pieces, and Teal woke up from her sad state. Baby Leah began crying, and Teal hurried to her, taking her in her arms. She apologized for not being there for the baby. Thompson entered the room and brought some baby food. They fed Leah, and Thompson gently hugged his wife. Meanwhile, Estio fell on the floor, appearing badly hurt. Thompson held Estio in his arms and took him to someone's house, placing him on a bed. Estio's face turned red, as if he had a fever. An elderly man in the house asked if Estio was an ability user, and Thompson confirmed that he was, mentioning that he had become that way after using his ability. The man explained that there were no medical facilities in Galatia that could treat ability users. Estio's condition was likely due to his inexperience in controlling his ability. Resting for a while should help, and he'd probably recover the next day. Thompson and his wife were concerned but couldn't do much. Niju, who had been silent until now, suddenly yelled that Estio was hurt. Thompson decided they needed to go back home but assured Niju that he would cover the costs. Niju asked about the request, and after seeing his happy wife, Thompson said he would reopen his business and gave Niju a guild coin. They left the building, and Niju attempted to talk to Estio. She informed him that the person he was helping had returned to normal, and the request had been a success. Niju then began to cry and pleaded with Estio to wake up so they could go home. The next morning, Estio woke up with Niju right beside the bed. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and then hugged him tightly. As they left the old man's house, he asked if Estio was sure he didn't want to rest for another day to ensure his condition was stable. However, Estio insisted he was fine. They walked back to the guild house, where Hawk welcomed them and praised Estio for completing numerous requests in a short time. He mentioned that Estio now had the highest reputation not only in the city but also with the nobles of neighboring cities. Hawk asked if Estio was aware of the rumors circulating about him. Confused, Estio inquired about these rumors. Hawk explained that people were talking about Estio as an ability user with a unique special power. Now, we see Estio and Niju standing in front of Sarah's house. Estio held a piece of paper stating that Sarah's father, Viscount Fabian, had sent a request for Estio's visit. The request's details were undisclosed, and the reward would be discussed after they addressed the issue. Estio wondered what kind of quest it could be, so he approached the mansion's door. The guards allowed him to enter. As they walked in, Hiru, the dog, rushed towards them with a smile, mentioning that it had been a while since they last met. Estio knelt down to greet him. Sarah arrived and jokingly asked Hiru if he liked Estio more than her, and Hiru's enthusiastic barking seemed to confirm her assumption. Sarah playfully admitted that she couldn't compete with Estio for Hiru's affection. She then asked why he had come this time, but upon seeing the envelope that belonged to her noble house, she realized her father had requested his visit. Sarah greeted him warmly and said it was nice to see him. However, Estio responded by saying it might not be a good idea to visit her house. Sarah grew anxious and playfully pinched his cheeks, asking why it wasn't a good idea. Estio then inquired if she was scared about him reading another person's heart. Sarah smiled and assured him that she wasn't afraid. After explaining his ability to uncover secrets that others might want to keep hidden, Sarah admitted it would be a bit embarrassing if he knew those secrets. Estio looked somewhat sad, but Sarah reassured him, expressing her trust in his character. She said she wasn't scared because she knew he would never use his ability against her. Shortly afterward, a butler interrupted their conversation, apologizing for the interruption. He suggested that Estio meet their father, Viscount Fabian, before leaving. Sarah requested that Estio visit her again before departing and sealed the promise with a pinky swear. A few minutes later, Estio entered Viscount Fabian's office and greeted him respectfully. The Viscount immediately inquired if Estio knew about the cactus. Estio admitted he did not, and Viscount Fabian went on to explain that the cactus is a resilient plant that can thrive in a desert, where water is scarce. He emphasized the need for precisely balanced moisture and proper care, as too little or too much water can harm the plant. Viscount Fabian noted that the cactus's size and condition can vary greatly depending on the cultivator. He also mentioned that an owner who doesn't appreciate its value might inadvertently harm it. Estio listened to the Viscount's monologue and wondered if he could read the plant's thoughts. When Estio focused on the cactus, he heard it complain that its owner was too talkative. Estio was taken aback, realizing he couldn't share this with Viscount Fabian without seeming disrespectful. The Viscount held the cactus in his hand and commented that while it's hard to say if plants have wills, this one seemed to think its owner talked too much. Suddenly, the Viscount surprised Estio by offering him a position as a subordinate, explaining that he wasn't just hiring him, but welcoming him as part of the Fabian family. Estio had inquired if he would become a soldier, but the Viscount had other plans. He offered to make Estio an advisor instead. He assured him that as an advisor, he'd be safe from mistreatment, and only Remil Fabian could give him orders. The Viscount explained that being an advisor was a great honor for a commoner. Curious, Estio asked about the duties of this role. The Viscount mentioned that Estio would mainly need to understand the thoughts of the people he pointed out. However, a warning followed. The cactus was pointed out as a trap, and the Viscount's intentions might not be good. Estio hesitated and expressed contentment with his current guild. The Viscount, however, insisted that Estio had no choice but to accept, as he'd given the order. Estio asked what would happen if he refused, and the Viscount explained nothing would happen immediately, but eventually, he'd have to agree. Despite his refusal, Sarah's father admired Estio's determination, thinking it might be an asset. The Viscount gave Estio some time to decide and instructed his butler to replace the useless cactus with pretty flowers. The butler took the cactus and escorted Estio and Niju out of the office. While walking, the cactus expressed its discomfort about being discarded. Estio asked the butler if he could keep it, even though it had spikes and was uncertain to bloom. The butler agreed, and Estio reassured the cactus that he wouldn't let it die. It was Estio's first time dealing with a cactus, so he was unsure of the temperature it could tolerate but told the cactus to let him know if it felt uncomfortable. They introduced themselves, and the plant said his name was Ahuru. Niju watched her master interact with the plant and thought it was amazing. Estio introduced the cactus to her, and the cactus's name was Ahuru. Niju then told the cactus he was cute because he was small. Ahuru told Estio he could pet him because he wouldn't prick him. Ahuru also mentioned that he could move by himself someday, but for now, he could only control the spikes while talking to people. Sarah's brother, Jerry, arrived and warned Estio never to return. Estio explained that the Viscount had requested him to come to the mansion, but Jerry called him a monster and mocked his attempts to teach a plant to talk. Eri also asked to buy Niju, offering 10 gold. Estio refused, and Jerry became furious, accusing Estio of defying a noble. Niju watched in fear as Jerry confronted Estio. She screamed for Jerry to leave Estio alone, showing her loyalty. The Viscount's son then raised his offer to 30 gold, saying he'd take Niju by force. Estio again refused to sell her, which infuriated Jerry even more. Royal guards surrounded Niju and Estio, making Niju angry. She ended up slicing the arm of one of the guards, causing a commotion. Jerry ordered other soldiers to capture and imprison them, accusing them of attempted murder. Niju had become furious, pondering how he could do something worse than a monster might have done without any hesitation. The soldiers, feeling threatened, drew their swords and charged at Niju. However, her fierce roar frightened them all, even scaring Jerry. At that very moment, the Viscount arrived, filled with anger. He called his son an immature troublemaker, gripping him by the shoulders. The Viscount believed that if he had been left alone, Jerry would have naturally come under his influence. But now, everything was in ruins. Jerry was utterly bewildered, and the Viscount ordered the soldiers to apprehend Estio and deal with Niju however they saw fit. One of the soldiers began conjuring fire magic, but Niju, looking at Estio, apologized, expressing her desire to stay by his side a little longer. Estio gazed at her with sadness in his eyes and assured her there was no need to apologize. Niju stated they would be parting ways from that point on. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred as the soldiers unleashed their magic. Jerry regretted that if he had simply taken the money, things wouldn't have taken such a terrible turn. Moments later, Estio emerged from the smoke and declared that those who owed an apology were not Niju but everyone who had attacked them. Jerry and his father were taken aback and ordered the soldiers to dispose of Estio. One soldier began casting fire magic but abruptly halted, while another poised a sword behind Estio, only to change course and turn the blade toward himself. Jerry and the Viscount couldn't believe their eyes. Estio stood amidst 3 remaining soldiers, with Niju lying on the floor beneath a translucent sheet. The soldiers dropped their weapons and lay prostrate on the ground. Sarah descended the stairs, calling for her father, and upon seeing Estio surrounded by the fallen soldiers, she became very frightened and fainted in her father's arms. The Viscount, now nervous, questioned Estio, asking if he would stop his actions. Estio thought to himself, why would he stop? He believed he had been mistreated from the beginning, remembering the abuse he and his friends had endured, their faces stained with blood. With a smile, Estio declared he would stop, but under one condition: everyone had to pretend that none of this chaos had ever occurred in the first place. The Viscount became confused when his son Jerry yelled at him, accusing him of being a murderer and demanding to know how he could propose such a condition. Estio then glanced at Jerry and replied with a smile, clarifying that it wasn't a proposal, but rather an order. Just then, Suki appeared and transformed into her tiger form. Estio placed Niju on her back, and Suki suggested that Jerry sit on her back as well. Estio agreed, and they listened to her plan. Suki swiftly left the mansion with Estio on her back. During their ride, Estio remarked to Suki that he truly possessed the ability to read a person's heart, control it, and even lead them to end their own lives. He admitted to having used this power to end many lives without feeling any remorse. Suki stopped and turned to him, saying that it wasn't a big deal. She claimed that if she were in his shoes, she would have done the same to those who had harmed him and threatened to take something precious from him. Estio understood her perspective but stated that, in the end, he was the one causing harm to others. Uhuru then joined the conversation and pointed out that someone who worried about whether they were normal or not couldn't be considered a monster. He noted that people would label them as monsters, including Niju, who was a talking white-haired monkey, and Suki, who could transform into a cat tiger or something similar. The next morning, a man arrived at the Ignis Guild and reported an order from the higher-ups in the guild. Hawk and Rosa, concerned, inquired about the issue. They examined the letter and discovered that someone from the headquarters believed that Estio was a dangerous user of special abilities. Adding to the concern, Estio had been missing for 10 days, and strange rumors were circulating in Fabian County. Hawk strongly defended Estio, emphasizing that he was not the type to harm others. Suddenly, Estio appeared in their office, apologizing for his late return. His clothes were dirty and stained with blood, and his face was covered in mud and bruises. Hawk welcomed him back with relief, and Estio asked if they were going to question his performance. Hawk and Rosa smiled, explaining that they had been worried when they lost contact with him. Hawk then inquired about Niju's condition, and Estio informed them that she had suffered some injuries and was resting. Hawk advised Estio to take some rest and submit his report in 3 days. At that moment, Parker, the guy who had previously reported to the higher-ups, spread his magical wings. He told Estio that he needed to accompany him to the headquarters right away. Estio agreed to the request, and Hawk questioned why he agreed so readily. Estio explained that as long as he was a member of the guild, he couldn't refuse the headquarters' decisions unless he left the organization. Hawk simply sighed and acknowledged that Estio's state. That concludes part 1 of this recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. What will happen next? If you would like to see a part 2 of this manhwa, let us know in the comments section below. Till next time, to go.